This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. So I'm looking at Analog Computing Magazine, issue number 14, and there's an ad in here on page 113 for American Software Club. And I'll read it to you here. It says, 15,000 members and growing. American Software Club has been selling software for the Apple, Atari, IBM TRS-80, and CPM computers, DEC, Eagle, Vector 4, Northstar, Xerox 820, Superbrain, Heathsinus, NEC, Televideo, Altos, Columbia, Osborne, Sanyo since 1981. Computerists don't just join ASC, they stay with us. Chalk it up to having 600 products in stock and our lowest price guarantee. Chalk it up to our free bi-monthly compendium magazine, which gives comprehensive product descriptions, club news, and services. Chalk it up to our toll-free technical support and order lines. ASC doesn't just sell software, we support it. Chalk it up to speedy shipping, because we know waiting can be frustrating. ASC has been shipping more than 60% of orders in under 6 hours. But don't just take our word for it. Join now and take advantage of our free 1-year membership offer with absolutely no purchase obligation. You'll have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And there's a coupon that you can cut out and mail in. Lee Konowe was founder of American Software Club, a mail-order software company. American Software Club sold software for CPM, Atari 8-bit, TRS-80, Apple II, IBM PC, C64, and other platforms. It started out with a sort of Columbia House Software of the Month model, where you automatically received a Choice of the Month software package, which you could keep and pay for or return at no cost. Later, the company switched to a more traditional mail-order catalog model. The company was founded around June 1981. In an article about software clubs in InfoWorld magazine, the company said it had about 2,000 members by the end of its first month. By February 1983, it claimed 10,000 members, and by September of that year had 15,000 members. This interview took place on June 7th, 2017 for me, and June 8th for Lee in New Zealand.
I was born in Manhattan, New York, which I think makes me an American by birth. And I came to New Zealand 11 years ago with my wife and 2 of our 6 kids because we thought we needed someplace fresh.
Nice.
And I think we were right.
Yeah.
But
like it there?
Yes, New Zealand's an amazing country. We'll have to do a different interview at some point when you have about 7 hours, and we could go through the list of why New Zealand is the most magnificent place on the planet. Excellent. But for now, the answer is we're very happy. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. Okay, I'd like to hop in the Wayback Machine. I know that you founded American Software Club around June 1981, but I'd like to go before that and kind of maybe you can give me a short run-up to how you got there. Education, how you got into computers, just sort of give me the prehistory, please.
Sure. Yeah, almost all of it by accident. That's how many things start. I am by educational training a psychologist. I don't lay claim to that very often, so I use the word retired. But in 1974, I found myself at Catholic University of America doing a PhD in psychology. And my interest at the time was in human factors work and what we were then calling biofeedback, or the human learning circle. Could we, in fact, change biological behavior through learning? And so I was doing a PhD I probably am the only person with this degree on the planet still, but it was in cardiovascular psychophysiology, which, to put it in layman's terms, how the heart can be affected by the brain. Can we, in fact, change certain biological functions? And I needed a computer in order to do my dissertation. And at that point, as you probably well know, there weren't any. But I heard about some guys who were working with a surplus calculator chip called the 8080, and that they had put together a computer called the MITS Altair, uh, without knowing anything further about how robust it was. This got me excited, uh, being an invention occurring at the right moment for my purposes. So I contacted MITS Altair only to find out that that was a hobbyist, do-it-yourself, solder it in the basement machine, that there were really no interfaces for it yet, and that outside of some number, probably 100 or so around the country, of hobbyists, there really wasn't anything going on. But they told me about a gentleman named Ed Faber who was attached to a company called IMSI. And so I immediately called IMSI, got Ed on the phone, and he immediately did what he did a lot in those days, which was to fabricate an outcome that wasn't actually available at the moment. And he said, "Oh yes, we have this computer called the IMSI 8080, and you could interface it to A to D converters and do whatever you want to do with it." I bought that line and said, "I'd like to know how much it would cost." And he said, "Well, it's in kit form." And I said, "Whoa, I thought we were talking about a complete machine." He said, "No, it is a complete machine, but we're not manufacturing them at this moment. What we're doing is prototyping, and you should certainly have one because it'll do what you want to do." And I bought that line. I said, "Okay, I'll buy one. How much are they?" And if memory serves correct, it was around $800+ for the kit, except that he wouldn't sell me one. He said, "You have to purchase 3." And I said, "I need one. And I'm a graduate student. That doesn't allow for buying 3 computers." And the answer was, "If you want one, you buy 3, but you could become a distributor."
Okay.
Well, that's how Ed was. And by the end of the phone call, I was the distributor for the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, having now committed to buying 3 over time, but 1 to be delivered immediately. I got off the horn with him and figured I got to sell 1 more of these before I tell my wife. And I got a hold of Ron Guberman, who is still the head of a company called Media Reactions, wonderful technological brain trust, who used to handle Radio Shack and Errol's Video and was a big player in what turned out to be AOL. Anyway, called Ron and said, "You need a computer for your advertising business." He was overjoyed with the idea because he loves soldering. So we had 2 out of 3 sold. And that night we heard that the next day there was a meeting of the NASA Computer Club over in Greenbelt. So we decided to go. And we had IMSI. I called up and I said, "What do you have in the way of materials for selling?" He said, "Really nothing, but I can fax you a 1-pager. This is the days when fax was a brand new technology. Nobody had fax machines personally, but I knew of a printing company that had one. So he faxed over the sheet. Ron and I took this 1 piece of glossy paper and headed out to this meeting in Greenbelt with all of these guys with 5 pens in their pen holders and little NASA tie clips. We went to the meeting and walked out with $22,000 in orders.
Wow.
Well, yeah, wow's great when you only needed to sell 1.
Right.
But within 3 days, I would find out from Ed that they were not able to fulfill that number of orders, which began a long and a sundry history of dealing with what now the world calls vaporware. And we ended up not only being the distributor, we ended up as being the alpha site for the testing of a language, because the next thing that I had to find out from Ed was what could we use as a language, and his answer real quickly was assembly. And I said, "Well, that's great, except I don't write in hex. And, do you have a BASIC?" He said, "Actually, we have a guy who's generating a BASIC." That guy was Bill Gates.
Sure.
That would become Microsoft BASIC we got our hands on it and became part of the feedback loop back to the coast as to what worked and did not work on a very, very simple 4K basic, because that was the largest memory board that you could get those days. So if you had an IMSI that was full boat, you had 64K of RAM. And so we became a test site for what became Microsoft Basic, and all of the sundry things that we knew nothing about at the time, like, loaders, paper tape loaders for cassette recorders so that you could get them to input the tape if you could walk the tape through a paper tape reader at the right speed. And it turned out Ron was very good at that particular task. So that was the beginning. That germinated into finishing my PhD, because we did get the computer working for what we needed it. And that really took me into the context of communicating in the very early days with a whole bunch of interesting people at a place called Apple, which I always thought should have been called Banana, but it was Apple and is to this day. And along around 80, it became clear to me that while there were fledgling people writing software, usually text adventure software, because the computer was still very limited to its screen functions. But we got involved with a Florida organization called Adventure International, and they were writing some of the first computer games. And then a company called Supersoft that was doing some very, very early work in the business side of things. And then a company wonderfully called Ashton Tate, which was producing the world's first meaningful, I think, database environment. And very quickly it occurred to me that there was a need to put people who were producing software together with people who were consuming it. And so we created American Software Club, which was based on one of my favorite things as a young guy, the Science Fiction Book Club. You got your 2 books every month if you didn't say no. And so we ended up distributing large amounts of software in what became American Software Club.
Yeah, I thought, based on my reading, it said that you get the catalog every quarter, I think. And then if you didn't opt out, you would get the automatic, the one piece of software.
Software of the month.
The software of the month.
Yeah, it started as a quarterly, but very quickly became software of the month, because we went from having a couple of hundred to, at its pinnacle, probably having about 4,000 members.
Wow.
And so,
okay.
Yeah.
So it seemed to me it was the Columbia House model. I mean, maybe you guys came first, but
I like the Science Fiction Book Club model better, but yes, it replicated that, and that really, over the course of a year or so, transitioned into less of a monthly ordering schemata and more of a large catalog that, at the first instance, I think only had maybe 6 pages, and within a year or two after that was up in the area of about 40 pages, which required us to start shipping large quantities of software, and we did. And then, of course, other people with much more money and much more interest in being software distributors started things like PC Connection and whatnot, and rapidly that became the way in which most people were getting their software back in the 90s.
So you said there was up to 4,000 members? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's a hard number for me to give you for sure, because part of what happened during this period is we spun off another company called David and Goliath Computers. And I don't know if you've ever heard about David and Goliath, but it was one of the first cloned computers of the MS-DOS variety, and was predicated on a computer coming out of Chinatown in New York called the Fountain. But we beefed it up and actually went on to produce a standalone product, which was an expansion box that gave people with PCs another 8 slots worth of powered environment. So we had, I believe, in that neighborhood of people in the club, but we then also had this parallel universe of David and Goliath users who were buying hardware.
So in my research, it said your PCs sold for under $1,000, and it says upwards of 800 PCs and more than 1,000 expansion chassis were shipped.
Yes, and that was the product that really survived for a period of time, was the expansion, because nobody had done that one. And the expansion chassis was a David and Goliath computer minus the standard motherboard with just a powered 8-slot subboard in it. Although we discovered a lot of physics we didn't know much about, like the transmission over ribbon cable and how far it could go from one chassis to another before clock functions got in the way. So it was a very educational process.
All right, so I believe American Software Club was founded about June 1981. In December 81, you claimed that in the first month you had 2,000 members. And then tracking your ads, in February 83, you claimed 10,000 members. And then in September 83, you claimed 15,000 members. So were you lying then, or are you misremembering now?
No, I'm misremembering now. Lying is not part of my normal thing. That's what we had Ed for. But I don't want to be super. I don't even know if Ed's still on the planet. He was a lovely guy. No, we had large numbers. I don't remember those numbers, but if that was our marketing material, then I can assure you that's what there was. I can tell you this as a backstop to it. At the point of 1983, I believe, and we're going back a long time now, we would have been at that point the largest or one of the two largest distributors for Ashton Tate in the United States.
Wow.
So we were shoving out a large amount of software.
Well, I would like to talk about the logistics of that in a minute, but
that's fine.
First, I'd like to know about the platforms that you've covered. I've seen your ads. I think I originally saw it in an Atari magazine. I've seen it in a TRS-80 magazine.
Yep.
So what platforms did you cover? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, no, I do remember. Certainly we started with CP/M because that was our orientation. We were very convinced that CP/M was going to rule the universe and that MS-DOS had no place to go.
Were they ever so?
You know, there were a couple of people who made that mistake. The other, we had Tandy or Radio Shack. We had Atari. We had Commodore. Basically, what happened was that we would take on a platform if the software manufacturer that we were working with covered a platform, and if we thought they would be popular. So Broderbund brought in several platforms because of the educational content. But in essence, we were being driven by what our population wanted.
So how did you pick the software of the month? Was that something that you picked in an editorial way, or was it just like Broderbund would come to you and go, hey, we really want to move, this new thing?
Well, remember, that part of the model didn't last all that far into American Software Club. So for its longest period of operations, it really wasn't it was a monthly catalog because it became a monthly catalog, but it wasn't a push product of the month kind of environment. I think initially it was driven by our gut level feeling about the size of the membership base. We knew what people had who were members because part of our little application that people filled out indicated what platform or platforms they were running. So we had that, and we also had just a feel for what was the most exciting category of software. There's no doubt about the fact that Adventure International early on, because of its textual games, really role playing would be the better term for it, drove a lot of our selections. Then Supersoft having once the floppy drive became available, and when American Software started, it was just becoming available in the large 8-inch variety. Once the floppy was there, then utilities took on a very big component of what we were selling. And not that long after that, the database world became everything. But games were then, as they are now, a rather driving force of what was going out the door. Of course, the games had very, very low profit lines. I'm going to try to remember, and you may have better data on this one, but I think many of our games were the under $15 variety. And I think some of them were actually under 10. And I know at one point early on, we actually produced a software product of our own, which was an attempt at a personal checkbook. So, and that went out in some fair quantity, but I also recall that at times we were using that as a giveaway for membership. So it may not have been as good a checkbook product as it was a giveaway product.
Okay, so let's talk about the logistics. You're pushing all this software that people either chose or was chosen for them, depending on the era, and for different platforms. Did you guys have a warehouse? How many employees did you have? How did you get all this stuff mailed? And
that's a good story. If you were in Ridgefield, Connecticut at this moment, and you could choose to be, it's a lot closer for you than I. And you went to 80 Topstone Drive in Ridgefield, Connecticut. It's also right on the Reading border, so you can call it either address. You will see this huge structure. It's called the Gepler Vinegar and Cider Mill. And it's a very large structure. It went back over 100 years when I bought it, and it was a cider mill in the old days. And it was a huge structure. I mean, I think it probably was in excess of 8,000 square feet altogether, some of it unfinished. And that became American Software Club. And yes, we had a lot of stock, but no, we had another advent occur at the time. And that was the advent of quick ship. UPS, to a lesser degree FedEx, but mostly UPS, was now able to do door-to-door so that we would have deliveries in the morning and shipments in the afternoon. So American Software Club very quickly became a twice-a-day hub, if you will, for predominantly UPS, although a lot of our expensive products went out FedEx as an option. But that was later. And so we had innumerable bags of beads. We had ourselves, that was my then wife, Robin Cantor. We had the kids involved. We had neighborhood people coming in at different times of the day, because the shipping cycle for us was order product in the afternoon, receive it the following morning when that was possible, and then ship out that afternoon. Wow. And in worst cases, we went for a kind of a 36-hour cycle where it was going out the day following. It depended where it was coming from and how quickly it could be disseminated. In many cases, in the first year or two, product was being sent to us by the producing company itself. In later period, Ingram and others like that started to become a vehicle for obtaining product. But we were always receiving Ashton Tate product directly, because that was from a profit point of view, it was the most significant software we had.
So you're in your advertisements, you say you save between 20 and 30% off the retail price. Was there any magic to that? Did you have these great deals with the distributors and publishers, or?
Oh, we had. I think we had very good deals. I think by today's standards, they'd be considered impoverished because, at best, I don't recall the exact splits, but at best, and from our biggest volumes, we were probably at 30%. So we were looking toward quantity shipped. And you have to keep in mind that at the time, the universe of users for us, I mean, yes, by 83, it was a different situation. But in 80 and 81, 80 when we were setting it up and 81 when we were operating, this was not a huge environment nationally,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah.
So we were very, very much a cottage industry.
It was profitable?
Yes.
Good.
Did it become
Was it?
less profitable later in that 83, 84 period? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you had major distributive players who were then capable of tremendous margin purchases.
How long did the company last?
Well, I think 84, late 84 perhaps. I don't know if I can nail that one down. What caused it to not continue was not so much that it was a financial failure. I thankfully haven't had many of those. What caused it to not continue was that my degrees had progressed to the point, and my job titles and my interests, to where I was doing other, what I considered to be very significant things. And to continue to do that against the pressure of, the large distributors probably would have allowed it to become unsuccessful. So it was just one of those things where you decide, we grew it, it was grand,
Yeah.
move on.
It's time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find any scans of the catalogs online. I'm wondering if you still have any of them.
I don't. But I just came in contact. One of the people who spent their afternoons and quite a few evenings with boxing product and whatnot was Todd Dennison, who still resides in Connecticut. And I've asked Todd to go hunt up. He did send me an image. We were selling at one point floppy disks, packaged 10 to a box. Those were the 5 1/4. And I think we sold 8-inchers as well. And Todd may have catalogs. Sadly, my ex-wife does not, and I think she lost interest with seeing anything with American software on it. So there are probably some number of thousands of people with them scattered across attics. But I do not even have a remaining David and Goliath computer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell me a story about that time that we haven't talked about yet, about American Software Club, about a person, about a problem, about something funny that happened in the warehouse.
Well, I can tell you a very bad day,
Sure.
actually, because it was a bad day for a lot of people. As I said, we were selling a lot of Ashton Tate. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with the history of Ashton Tate.
A little bit. I mean, debase, and I know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was George. There was no Ashton. It was George Tate, and he thought an English-sounding name with 2 names was going to be great, so he went with Ashton Tate. And George and I had a lot of conversations together in the course of our selling a fair amount of his product. And in fact, I think it's in a closet behind me. But I'm not, it's either in this closet or upstairs. I have an Ashton Tate Mylar jacket that he sent as a present, along with live lobsters and filet mignon to our driveway at 80 Topstone to thank us for the sales numbers we had produced. And when I called him up, he had just passed away at his desk.
Oh.
So that's not a happy story. But the early years of the computer world were full of unhappy stories. Are you familiar with the Eagle computer?
No.
That one doesn't ring a bell for you.
Mm-mm.
Eagle was a very well-funded MS-DOS clone. And I say very well-funded, so very well-funded that there were tens of millions of dollars invested in the company. And on the day of its opening party, the CEO was given, I think it was a very hot sports car. Don't ask me to tell you if it was a Ferrari or a Mazda. I can't remember, but it was in the San Francisco area. And as he left the party, he ran off the road and killed himself.
Ferrari.
Not on purpose.
Yeah,
Not
sure.
on purpose. Could have been a Ferrari.
Wikipedia says it was a Ferrari.
Oh, okay. Then
Wikipedia is never wrong, so.
Never wrong. Until it's edited, and then it's more wrong or more right.
Right.
Yeah, so there were days like that in the not so good. If you're looking for a more pleasant story outside of the one that I told you about, our coming out with $22,000 in orders for the inside the first night, which we thought was pretty funny, until it became really problematic to deliver product. Because remember, what was happening, the IMSI was an absurdly well-designed, very strong machine. But because there were no mass manufacturing for it, it had to be done by hand. And so in selling $22,000 worth of IMSIs, this required us to build $22,000 worth of IMSIs, which converted Ron's basement into a factory with kids and everybody else we could find, trying to figure out who was good at not producing a cold solder joint. But all along the way, you were confronted very early on with people making bizarre claims about what was available for purchase in the form of technology, and then having it not exactly be that way. And I'm not so sure that's changed entirely, but
Yeah. No.
and it happened with Atari, and it certainly happened with Commodore, and it happened with Osborne, and it happened with a lot of really good people who just hadn't. There wasn't a group of people who had been in the business of manufacturing microcomputers. I mean,
Yeah.
I had occasion to be in Auckland a few months back while the other Steve from Apple, unfortunately, we can't have Steve Jobs anywhere anymore, but Woz was in Auckland and was talking about those days and how you had a rush to judgment kind of complex, in that everybody who was in the business, whether it was the software side like American Software or the hardware side, was in a blind rush to try and produce the next best thing. And because none of us, and I think I could say that fairly globally, really. I mean, Atari certainly had a manufacturing background and capability, but most of the earliest systems didn't. And there was a long time to get things to where they needed to be, which is where the consumer thought they were when they were making purchases. So there were a lot, in the software world, there were a lot of bugs. In the hardware world, there were a lot of things that didn't actually work.
What haven't I asked you about Software Club that I should have?
About American software?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I guess this is where you'll have to edit out some silence, because I'm thinking. I guess an interesting question was my motivation money? And the answer was no, although I do enjoy money. Uh, the motivation for American Software Club was that Robin and I both felt that somebody had to step forward and try and be an adhesive, consumer-sided representative to the software industry, because there weren't formalized methods. And one of the things we did do, by the way, I didn't remember this until now. I apologize for the memory. I'm still pissing off myself over the 15,000 people, because I'm quite sure Robin can tell me exactly what the print runs were for the catalog. So I may come back to you on that.
Sure.
But one of the things we did do, which I think was extraordinarily helpful, is we presented a feedback loop to the manufacturers. Beyond simple, you sold us 10 and we sold 9, in that the membership of the club felt very much engaged in reviewing software, in commenting on software, in rating software, and probably had a fair amount to do with the direction that some of the companies took in their second and third and fourth level product developments, because we were a hell of a good source of feedback.
Do you remember anything, a particular piece of software perhaps that was terrible and you got to provide feedback about that or something?
I probably should have instant memories of a dozen or more. Nothing. Nothing that jumps to mind. One of the things that we didn't have going for us at American Software was we didn't have a whole lot of multiple platforms to run things on. So we weren't Atari based. We didn't do it. We did later on have a Tandy, a TRS-80. But in general terms, we were fairly limited in-house to testing that which we actually could run.
Huh.
And for us, I mean, remember, we were running product that was multi-platform. So if an Adventure International game was out for Commodore and we didn't have Commodore, that wasn't problematic, because in essence it was running under an op system that was running on a platform that we had.
Right.
But I think where our benefit came in was actually in our own business model, because when we started, this was a totally mechanical order process, and when it ended, there were Macs involved. I have a fond memory of running down to Norwalk, Connecticut, to get one of the earliest, iMacs that hit the floor, and was just absolutely godsmacked by the UI. I just couldn't. It was what all of us imagined, but nobody had seen, and that was a pretty wild day. You were about to say something because you had that look on your face.
You mentioned platforms again, and I wanted to circle back to that real quick. But before DOS took over everything, can you give me a sense of what percentage each platform was? TRS-80, Commodore, Apple, whatever. Sort of. Where was your bread and butter, particularly in one particular place?
In the earliest period,
yeah.
It was CPM. And we didn't, I don't think it's hard because I'm not looking at a timeline plot of when each platform came in. But certainly by the time Apple, you have to remember, one of those things I think people don't know is that the Apple computer was the first platform to run MS-DOS, outside of an 8080 environment.
Mm-hmm.
It was an emulation environment, but nonetheless. No, I can tell you the CPM, and this is just how early things were. CPM was absolutely, and its follow-up, MPM, Remember, CPM produced a multi-user environment
Yeah.
before in the micro world before anybody else, and MPM for us was an astonishing product because now you could have two terminals if you had enough RAM. Um, but no, the early time for American software was heavily a CPM environment, and I couldn't give it a splits. I can ask Robin to see if she remembers, but um, this is a long time ago.
Yeah. No, it's not even fair. I asking you any of these questions. This is completely unfair that I'm asking you these things that
No,
happened 35 years ago.
I think it's a very solid interview, honestly, and I'm chagrined over my inability to pop off the top of my head sales numbers, or for that matter, our membership numbers.
No, no, it's
You
all right.
know, I can remember what it looked like once a month when we were in the monthly cycle period, and I'm remembering it as monthly. Some part of me wonders, was that just at the very end and we were bi-monthly? Before that, we certainly started quarterly, but the name of the company was, American Software was perceived that it was supposed to end up as a monthly. Um, but I can remember because our catalog was mailed out under a bulk rate U.S. mailing environment that we had to rubber band our catalogs together by zip code. Zip code was a very new, big issue then, and there were just enormous numbers of piles of catalogs. So if I said 15,000, I'm pretty sure that that's an accurate representation. Um, but I'm horrified that when asked, I can't tell you.
No, it's all right. No, it's all right. Um, so what do you do today?
Today, I work for the New Zealand government along with my wife, Denise. We are online educators. Uh, yeah, we do online education for the New Zealand government and for its ministries. So, for example, if you were a real estate agent in New Zealand, and we have 19,000 of them, which is far too many, you're required to take annual education to maintain your license. And we run an environment called eAgent that offers only online education, but not just to real estate. We did the immigration side of New Zealand's government a couple of years ago. Um, we do all kinds of groups, and it's online education for professional advancement or for adhering to requirements of what it was. Um, my background was predominantly in psychology. I was a forensic profiler for a good portion of my life, working in the Intel community in Washington. And now this is what I do. I'd like to think of myself as semi-retired. So I'm only putting in about 40 hours a week.
You got to cut back. Yeah, yeah, I get
Well, I
it.
can tell you that American Software went from early in the morning until way, way too late to be a tolerable environment for anybody. Um, but no, that's what we do now,
Nice.
and it's a lovely, lovely kind of profession to be in because you're doing educational work, and we like that. And you're writing content and working on educational platforms that are online platforms. So it's very enjoyable.
Great. I think this is my last question. If you could send a message to the Atari and TRS-80 and CPM users from back in the day who are now listening to this, what would you tell them? What would you tell them?
The wisdom thing. Okay. What would be the message to those guys who are still around? Um, you lived through very exciting and dynamic times. And while they were probably far more frustrating times than you anticipated when you bought that first box, you got to watch the germination of the invention of the wheel. You got to be involved at a very personal level because there were far fewer people involved. What Apple sells now in one quarter, I don't know if it's 1,000 times or 10,000 times what was being sold in a year. It's the people who went through all of this, and we had no choice. I was born in 1944. You're born and you go through whatever time process you happen to fit into. But I think those of us and the people who participated with American Software Club and David and Goliath Computers and Apple and the larger, most successful, those companies are what they are today because of the geek. We didn't know we were geeks. There was no term. We knew we didn't fit in with the guys from the gym.
Yeah.
But we were there at a time when even if we were just consumers, we played a very pivotal role in what happened to lots of companies and lots of people's futures. And the products that we now have today are a function of those very early inputs. I look at an iPad that now has a stylus, remembering how Steve felt about styluses. But it's the input of the consumer. And American Software Club was about its consumer. That's why we were there. And it was a hell of a ride.
Nice. Awesome.
If you track it back, I don't know if anybody's ever done a tree, but man, there was so many places where it could have ended early. And there were probably places where it could have gone and become better early. But the people, I wish I still had my MSci. I don't. Ron Guberman still has his. So the number 2 machine is still around. And he has I think he has a David and Goliath computer. I don't know if he has the chassis. But I'm not I'm nostalgic for the memory of what it was about to participate in something that everybody wasn't about, and that ultimately ended up actually impacting on a whole lot of people. If you had gone to that first computer club meeting that we went to in Greenbelt and thought about, yes, these were very bright scientist types. They were, really. But the average person did not understand why one of these machines would ever enter their lives. And yet many of those people are alive today, and those machines have entered our lives, big time. Denise and I couldn't be doing the online education that we do today without it.
Sure.
I had great jobs along the way as a consultant. I look back on it fondly, but I don't look back on it. I don't know, the word nostalgia. I look back on it as being significant and important. I think those years that Rob and I attributed to American Software, and when I was doing my dissertation, and when Ron and I were pushing computers that didn't do as much as they should have, that was seminal stuff. We didn't invent the chip. We weren't the bright enough guy to do what Wozniak did. But in our own way, we added a lot to the pie.
Yeah.
And so I hope it was useful.
This was great. Thank you so much, Lee.
That's no problem. If you come to New Zealand, and you should.
Yeah.
I would absolutely, this is the most beautiful place on the planet. And